So I've been thinking a lot about the Winch Claw lately, with the Grand Majors now almost coming to a close. They're halfway over. The final Stockholm portion is almost over. That is, they've been on for a while, I think. And ever since the Grand Major was announced back in I think season 5 or 6, it kind of made me think about a lot of the balancing decisions that I personally disagreed with, starting around season 3, and kind of how the state that the finals has been in competitively ever since then, and also how that affects new players as well. And because I do think the finals does have a bit of an issue with onboarding new players, and I've started identifying some weak points that is making it a bit harder for player retention. I'm not saying that for certain, because at the end of the day Embark has the statistics to be sure of that, so they know best to a degree. But I have had some time with this game. I've been playing it since the week that it came out, and I absolutely love the finals. So I think there are some things that I have opinions on. These are just my opinions. I'm going to say things that maybe are going to upset a lot of people, and that's fine. I don't want you to take this as like a personal attack on anybody. But I really want to see success for the future, and I kind of have hope that maybe the Grand Major will influence some future balancing changes that will be healthier for the game, hopefully, so that the meta will become less stale. We've been in kind of a sore spot for a long time since the game came out. It hasn't been horrible. Like the game's in a mostly healthy spot, I think, and I think most people agree with that. But there are some sour spots that need to be ironed out, I think, for long-term success. And I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about that today. This is an unscripted rant, so I apologize if I'm kind of talking really fast or if my thoughts are very hard to follow. I edited over some of this audio, but this is not like a well-reviewed rant. This is just me kind of spilling my thoughts into Audacity and putting it into a video. So I also apologize if I don't maybe get my thoughts across in the best way, but I just kind of I see more people talking about this now, and it's something that I've been had on my mind for a very long time. So, what are my thoughts on the Winch Claw? This is going to be about the Winch Claw today, because I do think it is probably the biggest stain on the way the finals is balanced, and I'm going to explain why. I hate the Winch Claw. I hate it. I think it's bad for new players. I think it's bad for experienced players. I think it's bad for solo queue, which, yeah, okay, that's kind of inevitable. Solo queue was going to suck in a team-based game to some degree, fine. And I think it's bad for the competitive scene. I think it's bad for casuals. I think Winch Claw is bad for everybody. I personally have been trying to get I've been begging for Embark to just delete the Winch Claw from the game, or at least do something about it, nerf it some way, ever since the day it got added. Before the Winch Claw, Heavy was a lot more balanced, like a lot more. I'm not saying Heavy's overpowered overall. I'll get into my overall opinions on that later, but the problem is Winchclaw fundamentally undermines every other balancing decision in the game. The sledgehammer got nerfed for a brief moment, and everyone was super pissed, right? The sledgehammer no longer one-tapped lights, I think. I don't remember exactly what changed, but they nerfed the damage quite a bit. And they did this because of the Winch Claw, because everyone started using the sledgehammer with the Winch Claw. And before the Winch Claw, the sledgehammer was a lot harder to land hits on. Unless you could only really lock people down with goo. There was no lock bowl at this time. So if you wanted to land hits with the sledgehammer, you had to have good positioning or like be able to close the distance effectively. And so the high damage was meant to compensate with that. You're a giant sponge running towards your target. And Light has the lowest health pool in the game. Being able to one-tap a Light with right click, or even with just left click, I think it was that powerful at one point. I can't remember, though. It's been so long since this game came out. being able to do that, that was your reward. Having that kind of power in your hands was your reward for being able to close the gap effectively and being a good heavy player. When the Winch Claw came out, it completely destroyed all of that. Now, Sledgehammer, there are other weapons that are also affected by Winch Claw. Pretty much every weapon that Heavy has is negatively affected by the Winch Claw in some way or another. You have this conflict where if you make something too strong, everyone's going to use the Winch Claw with it because the Winch Claw makes it 10 times stronger. If you nerf it to compensate for the Winch Claw, then the Winch Claw, everyone's going to use the Winch Claw anyway, because now you've just made it the only viable way to play with that weapon. And people are going to get mad at you because you nerfed their favorite playstyle without the Winch Claw. Or people who use the Winch Claw are going to get mad because they don't understand why it's overpowered. Embark's kind of put themselves in a situation here where the Winch Claw has basically made Heavy impossible to balance. And the Sledgehammer is by far the best example of this, because the Sledgehammer does such big damage at close range. What this kind of reminds me of is Halo Combat Evolved. The Halo community has this very long, ongoing argument between the new players who really like having sprint in Halo and the old players that think sprint is ruining Halo. And there's all kinds of arguments for both sides. And I mean, the newer games are designed how they're going to be. Some people who are Halo veterans aren't going to like it. That's a kind of a different discussion because that's a different game. And those are different games in the same series. They're not going to be the exact same. But what really kind of kicked that into high gear recently was when Halo CE got another remaster announced. 343 decided they wanted to add sprint to the original Halo Combat Evolved, and that breaks everything because now the original story is now suffering because now the original map design and the atmosphere and environmental storytelling is going to be ruined. The pacing of that is going to be ruined. It's going to ruin the immersion. The combat is going to have to be rebalanced so that the sprint doesn't ruin it, and you have to fit sprint into the combat loop so that it's useful and you're encouraged to use it, which at that point, I mean, this is kind of not the same thing because that's also kind of a preservation issue, which is a different topic entirely. But the point is, balancing is a butterfly effect. When you change one thing, you change the entire context surrounding how you balance the game. So adding one slight mechanic that might be considered a quality of life or just a cool feature to play with, it's really much more than that. It's not like you really have to be careful because every single change you make into a game's balancing affects everything else. And that's kind of what this reminds me of. And the reason why this is so terrible for the finals in particular is because it ruins player agency. It ruins the flexibility of the game. A lot of what people like about the finals is the Team Fortress 2-esque sort of choose your own play style or create your own class type of gameplay where it's not like a hero shooter where your character has a certain job that they're designed for. It's you create the character that suits what you want it to do. That's why they call it a dynamism shooter. Every part of the game is supposed to invoke player creativity. It is the very definition of a sandbox shooter. You ruin that when you make one specialization or one or two gadgets too valuable to the game's meta, and now everything else is balanced around that. That's kind of what Winch Claw does, and there are other classes that have their own sort of versions of this. The Defibrillator has some issues in triple medium team comps and other stuff. Like there are other gadgets that are so-called essentials, and the jump pad and whatnot, but they don't have that issue nearly as bad as I think the Winch Claw does, in my opinion. Before Winch Claw, we had something called the Goo Gun, and there are people who still use this, and it's probably the most niche heavy specialization in the entire game because it takes so much skill to use, but it's also the most versatile. So the Goo Gun's main use was to build fortifications, but one thing it's not very great at doing that necessarily. It's mostly better for building ad hoc platforms like hold the cash box in or doing like basic cash box manipulation or cash out. My bad. It was also really good as a mobility tool for the heavy. It gave the heavy the ability to scale walls and stuff, kind of like how the lights can do. The other thing it was really good for, and what made it such a good pair with the sledgehammer, was that it could lock players in place. What made this different from the Winch Claw was you still had to close the distance, and you had to actually aim at your target. The further away they were, the harder it was to aim at them because you had to lead your shot. It's a slow-moving projectile, but and the Winch Claw hasn't made the Goo Gun entirely obsolete. To be fair, the Winch Claw does have limited range. It's still way too long in my opinion, but it does have a limited range. The Goo Gun has much further range if you can lead your shots, but the Goo Gun does not bring your target to you. It only stuns them for like, it's not even anything like the old stun gun was. It only stuns them for like, I don't know, like a second or two, and then they're back moving again, and the goo breaks. So you have to keep hitting them consistently, and then follow up a hit, which may not work. They might slip away from you last second when you're right in front of them. So the Goo Gun really wasn't a free kill button. You had to work for it, and you had to be really good with it. It could be really oppressive, and it could be really fucking annoying to fight against, but that was your reward for getting good with it. The Winch Claw doesn't require that kind of skill. You literally just press a button. People are like, oh, well, you can miss with the Winch Claw. It has a travel time. It really doesn't. It's really not that hard to hit with a Winch Claw, I'm telling you. And even if it was, like, it's nowhere near balanced out by the rewards you get for hitting a player with the Winch Claw. Getting the player brought to you is a mistake. That is the part that makes Winch Claw such a problem, because now you have all these close range weapons. Heavy is a defensive character. Now, for things like the Pyro Mines combining with the Winch Claw, I don't have a problem with that because that takes some setup, and that's not a thing you can just keep doing repeatedly and spamming. It's not something that you can do on a whim in any fight, so that's something I don't have a problem with because it's kind of like, okay, it was a setup, okay. When you combine that with the sledgehammer and some of the other weapons, the SA-12 flamethrower, I'll get into that in a bit. The sledgehammer makes the Winch Claw a much bigger problem because now you cannot balance the sledgehammer. You literally cannot balance the sledgehammer anymore. It's either does too much damage and the Winch Claw is overpowered, or it does too little damage and the Winch Claw is a necessity to play heavy. I tried asking people on Reddit, don't ever do that by the way, Reddit is a fucking cesspit. I tried asking people on Reddit about this, what are some ways to counter the Winch Claw? Because I genuinely wanted to know. Okay, why are other people not talking about this? What do they know that I don't? I've been playing this game since it came out. I highly doubt that there's something that I have not considered, but I will give it a try. And before I tell you what the response was, let me remind you, this is the final subreddit is the same subreddit where they had such a problem with people bitching about light class for really invalid reasons, that the mod team actually, there was so much infighting over it, and the mod team actually had to hold a poll. Basically, they weren't gonna ban discussion of light class, but they were gonna say, okay, no more just I hate this class, please nerf it posts, because it was getting out of hand. Unless it was like actual constructive criticism. And the majority of members voted don't ban it because it's censorship instead of, quality control. That's just a reminder of who we're dealing with here. Most of the replies I got were people saying that it was a skill issue and not giving me any advice at all, and saying that I was just bitching and whining, even though I made it pretty clear I was trying to have an open discussion about this because I genuinely wanted to know. Or it was people giving suggestions that made no sense. For example, one player said, use the jump pad if you're on medium. Okay, well, the jump pad doesn't work because you're stunned for the duration of the Winch Claw. Once you move up to that player, the jump pad doesn't work if you're already standing on it. The jump pad only works if you walk over it. Okay, it only works if you run into its hitbox. It does not work if you were already in its hitbox when it is spawned. So you cannot do this because the heavy is going to be standing on it already by the time you are allowed to place it. And even if it did work, you'd be going up in the air with him, which is a problem. He's probably just going to kill you anyway, before he goes up in the air. So not going to work. Evasive dash, pretty hit or miss. Cloak, don't even think about it. Grappling hook takes too long to come out. There's, I mean, the shields, hell no. The sledgehammer breaks most of those. Even the riot shield is pretty unreliable against it. So I'm gonna no. Every single suggestion that people had was bullshit. I'm just gonna say it. Every single suggestion they had was bullshit. I wasn't necessarily naming all the suggestions there. The jump pad one was a real suggestion. A lot of them were literally just people saying, "Oh, just walk away from it," or "Oh, you're just bad at the game," even though I've been playing since it came out. That was everything I thought about, and I'm like, no. And I think the reason why people don't understand why this is a problem is because, I mean, I'm just gonna say it. I don't think they know how the game works, and I'm not saying that they're stupid. What I mean to say is, a lot of these people they grow complacent because the Winch Claw has been part of the game since season 3 at this point. That's most of the game's lifetime now, and they don't see the problem with it because they're not on the receiving end. They don't necessarily have a good win rate, or they're maybe not that amazing at the game. I mean, how can it be overpowered? It can't be overpowered if it's not easy to win with it, right? I mean, it's not going to single-handedly help you wipe a whole team that's not already down. So you can kind of see how, from their perspective, it maybe doesn't seem overpowered, even though a lot of it in those 1v1 matchups and those when it's just not fun to deal with. It's not really a fair fight, but in the grander scheme of things, it might not seem so overpowered. And by the way, that example I gave of like on the finals subreddit, that was not an isolated, oh, just the subreddit thing. I know I kind of played it out like it was because people on that subreddit really are dicks. I had one person following me around on every post just complaining that I'm a light main, and he never got any warning for it at all. Just that guy was so annoying. Oh my god. But this is not like an isolated thing. This is something I see in the Discord server too, and like in the main places where the community hangs out. These are even like higher level regular players who believe this because they believe, oh, you can just walk away. You know, they send that little Michael Jackson like moonwalk gif where he just, moonwalks away, twirls around and then moonwalks away from the flamethrower from the Winch Claw. And I'm like, it's not that simple. Like, have you played against a flamethrower winch heavy before? Have you done that? And I think there's a fundamental design flaw with the way that Winch Claw, the kind of behavioral patterns that Winch Claw instills in people when they play the game. So I'm going to walk back around to the flamethrower for a second. The flamethrower. I'm going to piss a lot of people off when I say this. I absolutely hate the flamethrower. I don't think it's overpowered. Before anyone says, "Oh, well, you're just okay, you're just whining at this point. The flamethrower is not overpowered." That's not what I'm saying. I do think the flamethrower is annoying. Why does it have so much range? Why is it so annoying to look at? Why does it have an infinite gas eraser? The trade-off was, first of all, the damage is pretty shit. Other than the afterburn, you have to get consistent hits on it, which is kind of, I think, what the range was supposed to help with. Because keep in mind, the flamethrower has been in the game since at least season 1, if not earlier. So this was before Winch Claw. So it was not balanced around the Winch Claw, like, at all. And the flamethrower was what made it balanced out in season 1 was you had to close the distance. Again, there was no Winch Claw at this point. So you had to either use Goo Gun or just run at them or position yourself well. And if it didn't work, you didn't get the kill. Or you didn't get sustain enough fire to really do anything. You're the slowest class in the game. So it was kind of a clumsy weapon to use, right? Like, it wasn't overpowered. It wasn't even really that good of a weapon, but it was okay if you wanted to use it, like, if you wanted to use it in a team composition to, like, really piss people off, and you had good positioning. Before, like, the flamethrower, like, you could get some kills with it if you just run at people in mouse 1. If you were lucky. You weren't going to win games doing that. You just weren't. People were just going to back away from you. They had guns. What the fuck were you going to do, right? You don't have a shield unless you have mesh shield. But I know a lot of people pair it with mesh shield, which is annoying. But, I mean, at that point, if you get baited into a mesh shield and then they pull out a flamethrower, that is kind of your fault. So, that I consider to be a valid strategy. That's fine. When Winch Claw got added to the game, it completely changed all of that, because now you can just walk up to someone, press a button, and they're standing right in front of you. And unless they have evasive dash, they're not getting away in any reasonable amount of time. You just hold W and mouse 1 and they're fucking dead. And even if you die first, they're going to be cooked alive after you're already dead. So at that point, it's basically just become a WM1 simulator. This is the gun that people who are really, really bad at shooters gravitate to, because all they have to do is press Q on their keyboard and then hold mouse 1 and W, and that's all they have to fucking do. That's not really what the flamethrower is necessarily meant for. Like I said, the flamethrower was not balanced around the winch claw, so it has all this range. So if you're a medium, you have to run away from it manually. You might be able to jump pad behind you while you're running away, or jump pad away from them yourself. That might help, but you really have limited options. If you're a light, you have the lowest health pool in the game, so that's certainly not helping. If you're in an enclosed room, God help you. It stopped mattering how you position yourself, and the winch claw basically became a tool for bad players to just rely on it. It became a crutch specialization for people who didn't really care about learning how to play the game and just wanted to get kills. Oh yeah, and then to make matters worse, they added the lockbolt in season 5, which is kind of like a winch claw that you can shoot on the ground, and it automatically catches all players and props within an area. It has, I think, about the same amount of health as an APS or not a turret, but like at least as much as a little more than an APS maybe. I'm not sure. It doesn't show a health bar when you shoot it. So now, if you don't have the winch claw, you can just use the lockbolt, and you can tie everyone nearby into an area and just stand there and shoot flames at them, and they can't get away. And if they do, the only way they can get away from you is to shoot at the lockbolt and destroy it. And there's no time for that. So basically, they are forced, at no fault of their own, to take all of your damage. That is just terrible. I'm sorry, that's just terrible game design. Like I really do not think that is a fun idea. I don't. When the lockbolt got added, I was like, oh no. No. I'm like, oh no, it's Winch Claw all over again. Not again. Stop doing this. Embark, what are you doing? And not everyone uses the Winch Claw that way. There are people who use it for cash box manipulation. I understand the uses it has. I don't have a problem with that. That's totally understandable. I totally get why that makes sense in the finals sandbox. But if it was any other game and this wasn't the finals and that wasn't kind of one of the main core elements of the game is the physics interactions, I really do not think anyone would have thought the winch claw is a good idea. I really think winch claw is probably the least interesting specialization in the game, and it's the most oppressive and annoying one, and it doesn't have a skill curve to it at all. It's just run up, press Q, mouse 1, and that's all most people use it for. And I think that is a real big problem, and they grow complacent with that. And when you grow complacent with that, you're not learning how to play the game. You're not learning how the game works. Your perspective on how the game's balancing should be is completely thrown off. These are all newer players who, they've been playing with the Winch Claw for pretty much their entire time on the finals, probably. And they don't see a problem with it. That's just how the game works for them. I also notice a large part of the casual player base that is more interested in the game's destruction physics or the other counterplay abilities or just the teamwork. They're going to be gravitating towards heavy, right? Like light is sort of the people who really like to actually play really into shooter games for the gunplay. They're going to gravitate towards light. So newer players who are more casual are going to like heavy more. I think that's just there's nothing wrong with that, but you see a large part of the casual player base, the more vocal side of it, gravitate towards heavy. I've noticed this. Heavy is like everyone's favorite class, so when it gets nerfed, it's like the finals 9/11 for some people. Not everyone, but for some people who take the game more seriously, but they're still not like a very serious player, they're going to see any change to the heavy as kind of oh well, they didn't need to do that. Heavy's fine, right? Like, and they don't like their favorite class being touched, and I get it. You know, change is hard. I hate dealing with nerfs. They suck. I get it. Change is hard. I'm not saying like you can't be mad that Heavy got nerfed. I get it. People are going to disagree on that, but there is a toxic positivity problem where people do not want to admit when Heavy has a balancing issue because Heavy's their favorite class. Or, you know, they're a super tryhard player maybe, and they're actually not a casual at all, and but they're not like, there are people who play exclusively World Tour and they want to collect all the skins, and Heavy is just their way of, they don't really care about the counterplay as much. Maybe some players, they just want to grind those for those emerald skins, and or they want to get ruby. That's their enjoyment. That's how they get enjoyment out of the game, is grinding things and unlocking things. And Heavy is their ticket to doing that. So you change Heavy, and now they feel like the game doesn't click with them anymore. I understand that, but I think it leads to this problem where people don't always give honest feedback. And my opinion is an opinion too. I have my own biases. I have the least playtime on Heavy, so I'm not gonna act like I'm the Heavy expert. I get it. I have my own biases. When Light gets nerfed, I bitch about it too. What they did with the thermal vision, I really think did not need to be nerfed. Like I said before, it creates this really confusing messaging for the developers, and no matter what they do, they're gonna make somebody upset. I think that really complicates things. I really think we should draw parallels here between Embark's previous decision with the rocket launcher, because the rocket launcher went through a similar phase. In season 1, it did like 150, I think like 150 damage, and then they docked it down to 140 because people were just using it to bully the fuck out of Lights. And then finally they knocked it down to 100. And every single time it got nerfed, someone was complaining, the destruction tool that I'm using doesn't get me free kills against Lights anymore. They just did this because Lights complained. They keep balancing this game around Lights. Yeah, they're gonna balance it around Lights. It's about making every kit work together. It's about making the most out of the player's experience and the player's decisions, making sure as many things are viable and not walling people into certain play styles because yours is the most oppressive. That is how balancing works. Embark is going to balance around Lights. I'm sorry to say that, and they should. They should balance around all classes. And they did this with the rocket launcher. They nerfed the rocket launcher's damage. I know it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for a direct rocket hit to deal only 100 damage, but that's how it works. It's not meant to be a free kill. It's meant to be a destruction tool. People still use it that way, as a fucking free kill tool, but it's not nearly as bad as it was in Season 1. Think also the elemental canisters, right? What if you are playing a kit that doesn't have a lot of grenades on you, right? Because you want more specialized gadgets and stuff. So what are you gonna do when you need gas on your defense, or you need smoke to cover you for a heal? And they kept adding more and more. They added the glitch barrels. They added the health barrels after testing them for a world tour event. They added that to make up for, oh well, what if you don't have this util on your team at all? Or what if you're in solo queue or something? That's okay, fine. You can have this, but you have to go look for it on the map. You have to collect these barrels and, find them in their limited quantity, right? That was the design mindset behind the elemental canisters and stuff. So Embark shares this mindset. This is not like just a me thing, and so I'm kind of baffled that they haven't done anything about the Winch Claw for this long. And what about all the new players who maybe don't like Heavy? Maybe they don't want to play Heavy, or maybe they like Heavy, but they don't want to play the Winch Claw because it's not fun to play with when you're actually, trying to really get into the game. I hate the Winch Claw. I don't like using it. I don't think it's very entertaining to use. It doesn't feel satisfying to get kills with it. It's not very mentally stimulating at all. How do those players feel? What if that was your first impression of the finals? What if you try World Tour or Quick Cash for the first time, and they changed Quick Cash to be even more of a third-party simulator because they changed the way respawns work? I hated that change, and that makes it even harder for me to introduce new players to this game because they don't have a place where they can get into the game without being constantly curb stomped by people who were playing the game the correct way. And I really think this is going to hurt the game long term if we don't do something about it. Because I had a friend who I brought into the finals like late season two, and then this was right before they added the Winch Claw, and we used to run world tours regularly. Because this was the season when they added a world tour, and I was just starting to get into tournament mode, and they removed single round cash out, and they replaced all of the tournament modes with World Tour because they were trying to rebalance tournament mode. A lot of people don't remember this. They seem to think that the I remember people used to think that the finals was turning into a Counter Strike clone, which is really funny. I don't. I guess there was a messaging problem there. The reason why World Tour was created was as an experimental thing to test out new features and help rebalance ranked mode, which they brought back in season 4. So this was how I played the game because I wanted to play the more in-depth rules, the longer tournaments and stuff. And I would drag this friend with me along, and he wasn't great at the game, but he kind of enjoyed playing it with me. But I honestly think we both hated the Winch Claw. He hated it especially, and this was during the really big heavy medium or medium heavy meta when everyone just spammed defibs, heal beams, and Winch Claw, and that's all everyone ever used. And I think honestly, if I wasn't there to play with him and be kind of like, okay, we're suffering together here, I don't think he would have stuck around. I genuinely do not think he would have stuck around to keep playing the game because that, I mean, that was like his first impression. I mean, those were his first impressions. That was his first 100 hours of playing, and he's constantly getting curb stomped by people who just press a button and win. And they get in three stacks with and the solo queue or duo queue being difficult. That's kind of inevitable. That's going to happen in team-based games, whether you like it or not. Every game is like that. But when the three stacks you're up against are just mindlessly using the same stale loadouts every round, and it's not fun anymore. I don't want to be forced into the same playstyle, and I know the people that I bring into this game don't want to either. That's not what the finals is about. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think I'm right? What do you want to add? What would you do differently? Do you think the Winch Claw should be removed? Do you think it should be changed? What would you change about it? Or do you think I'm just, a piss baby light main and maybe I don't know how to counter heavy? Maybe I'm just bad at the game. I don't know. Tell me what you think in the comments. Like if you like, dislike if you dislike. Thanks for watching.